My parents had my grandmother's $38,000 in their account, their suitcases packed for Europe, and yet, at the airport, they looked her in the eyes and said, "There's no ticket for you. Go home." So how did a 71-year-old woman go from dreaming of Paris to being abandoned under fluorescent lights while her own daughter walked away like it was nothing? My name is Margaret Cleveland. I'm 29, and I work as a physical therapist, which means I spend my life reading what people don't say out loud: tension in the shoulders, shallow breathing, the way a smile can look perfect and still mean danger. And today I'm going to tell you the story of the morning my parents tried to erase my grandmother from their family trip, and how that single moment became the first domino in the biggest mistake they ever made. It was December 2nd, 6:30 a.m. at Denver International Airport. The kind of morning where the air feels sharp and everything smells like burnt coffee and cold metal. The terminal was already loud, rolling suitcases, boarding announcements, strangers arguing quietly at check-in counters. But my grandmother, Eleanor Brennan, didn't hear any of it. She was glowing too hard. She was 71, a retired nurse with hands that still shook slightly from decades of night shifts, widowed for 5 years. Living alone in the house my grandfather bought in 1985, the one she kept spotless because it still felt like him. For weeks, she'd been packed and repacked like a teenager going on her first big trip. She'd laid outfits on her bed and folded them again because she wanted to look nice in photos. She'd been so excited the night before that she called me at 3 a.m., just to whisper about the Eiffel Tower. "Maggie," she'd said, voice bright as a child's, "do you think it's really as beautiful in person?" I remember swallowing the guilt like a stone. "Even more beautiful, Grandma," I told her, because I didn't know how to say. "You might never see it at all." That morning, she wore the navy wool sweater she'd bought specifically for Europe. Her brand new passport pages, still crisp, still empty, peeked out of her purse like a promise. Her small suitcase sat beside her, neat and careful, as if she'd packed her entire life into that little rectangle of hope. And my parents? My parents looked like people about to get exactly what they wanted. My father, Victor Cleveland, 50 years old, pharmaceutical sales director. The kind of man whose voice always sounds like he's closing a deal, even when he's lying. Clean cut, polished, calm. My mother, Natalie, 48, former PR consultant, currently between opportunities in the way people say when they don't want to admit they're sinking. Her hair was perfect. Her nails were perfect. Her smile when she offered it was perfect in that way that never reaches the eyes. They were standing near the check-in counter, already checked in, already ready. They waved when they saw us. My father did that bright, public smile that says we're such a loving family. My mother barely looked up from her phone. "Morning, Mom," Victor said, leaning in to kiss Grandma's cheek. Grandma practically vibrated. "I'm so excited," she said. "I don't think I slept at all. I kept thinking about Paris." Natalie gave a soft laugh. "You'll be fine, Mom. We'll get you settled." I pushed Grandma's luggage cart closer, and my stomach tightened. As a physical therapist, I can tell when someone is bracing for impact. It's subtle shoulders rising, breath shrinking, and even though my parents were smiling, they were braced, like they were waiting for something to land. Grandma adjusted her purse strap and looked at Victor. "Did you double-check I'm in the system? I know you said you booked everything, but..." Victor pulled out his phone like he was about to show her a confirmation number. He tapped the screen, frowned dramatically, then tapped again. That performance, those few seconds, was the cruelest part, because he already knew. He looked at my mother, and my mother stepped forward, placing a hand on Grandma's shoulder as if she was about to deliver comfort instead of destruction. "Mom," Natalie said, voice syrupy, "we think there might have been a problem when we booked." Grandma blinked. "A problem?" Victor sighed like he was the victim here. I forgot to finalize your ticket." It took a second for the words to register, like Grandma's brain rejected them on instinct. "My ticket?" she repeated. "But I gave you the money." Victor nodded quickly, as if that settled it. "I know. I'm sorry. This is my fault. But the flight boards soon and last-minute tickets are insane." Grandma's mouth opened, closed. Her eyes darted between them. But I paid, she whispered. $38,000. You said everything was taken care of. Natalie's hand stayed on Grandma's shoulder, but her fingers pressed just a little too hard. Mom, please don't make a scene, she murmured, like Grandma was the one behaving badly. I watched my grandmother's face change in slow motion, confusion collapsing into hurt, then into something worse. Shame. Because that's what scammers do, even when they're family. They make you feel embarrassed for trusting them. So, Grandma said, voice thin, I should go home? Victor wouldn't look her in the eye. That's probably best, he said. My mother nodded like she was offering mercy. It's a lot of walking anyway. Long flights, jet lag. You'd be more comfortable at home. There was a beat of silence where the airport noise rushed in around us, people laughing, luggage wheels clicking, announcements echoing overhead. And my grandmother just stood there holding her passport like it was suddenly a joke. I felt heat rise behind my eyes. Not just anger, something deeper. The kind of protective rage you feel when you see someone gentle being humiliated in public. And then I said the 4 words that changed everything. I'm staying with her. Natalie's head snapped toward me. Margaret, don't start. Victor reached for my arm. Maggie, we're going to miss the flight. I stepped back, placing myself between them and Grandma. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat, but my voice came out steady. No, I said. You're not leaving her. Not after taking her money? Victor's face tightened. You don't understand. Oh, I understand, I cut in. Because here's the part they didn't know. 2 weeks earlier, I'd been at my parents' house after Thanksgiving, just trying to print a recipe. My mom's laptop had been open on the counter. Email was already pulled up. And I wasn't snooping, not at first, until I saw a subject line that turned my blood to ice. Mom's situation. Final plan. I clicked it. And what I read wasn't just about a trip. It was about a nursing home deposit. January move-in. 3 facilities they were touring. A timeline. A plan to make my grandmother sign papers when they got back. A plan to take her house equity to pay off their debt. $182,000 in debt. And one line that burned into my memory. She won't have a choice. So, standing there at the airport, watching my grandmother crumble, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone. I didn't wave it like a weapon. I held it up just enough so my parents could see the screen. I found your emails, I said quietly. All of them. My mother's face went white so fast it was like someone drained the color with a syringe. My father froze, mid-breath. Natalie lunged toward my phone on instinct, like she could erase truth with her hands. I stepped back. I already sent copies to myself, I said, and to someone safe. You can't delete anything. Now people were staring. Not because I was shouting, because my mother looked like she'd just seen a ghost. Victor lowered his voice, the way he does when he's trying to intimidate someone without making a scene. We'll deal with you when we get back. I met his eyes and smiled once. Small and cold. No, I said. When you get back, you're not going to find what you think you're going to find. For a second, my parents hesitated. I could see them calculating. Fight me here in front of strangers. Risk the word elder abuse being said out loud. Or run. They ran. Victor grabbed their carry-ons. Natalie shot my grandmother a look, not remorseful, not guilty annoyed, like Grandma was an obstacle. You'll regret this, my mother hissed at me. Then they disappeared into the security line, leaving my grandmother standing in the middle of the terminal with her suitcase, her new passport, her navy sweater, and the wreckage of her trust. Grandma turned to me, voice shaking. Maggie, what just happened? I took her hand, squeezing gently, trying to anchor her. We're going home, I said, and then I'm going to show you exactly who they've been behind your back. And as we walked back through the airport, past families hugging, past couples laughing, past strangers beginning their vacations, I realized something terrifying and clear. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was a plan. And my grandmother and I had exactly 3 weeks to make sure my parents learned what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. 6 weeks before that morning at the airport, before the humiliation, before the emails, before I realized my parents were capable of something so cold our family still looked perfectly normal from the outside. If someone had taken a photo of us back then, it would have looked like the kind of picture people frame and post online with captions about love and gratitude. That's the dangerous thing about betrayal. Most of the time, it doesn't start with shouting or obvious cruelty. It starts quietly, inside moments that look almost beautiful. The night everything began, we were sitting at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, my mother's favorite place for family announcements. She loved restaurants like that, dim lighting, polished wood tables, servers who spoke softly and treated everyone like they were important. It created the illusion that life was under control, even when it wasn't. My mother had always believed that if you surrounded bad news with expensive wine and candlelight, people would accept it more easily. Grandma Ellie sat across from me, carefully folding her napkin in her lap like she always did. She still had that habit from years of hospital shifts, everything neat, everything orderly. At 71, she moved a little slower than she used to, but there was still something steady about her, something strong. She'd spent decades working night shifts as a nurse, raising my mother after my grandfather died, saving every dollar she could. She wasn't wealthy, but she was careful. She believed that if you worked hard and treated people well, life would eventually return that kindness. My father raised his glass halfway through dinner. "We have exciting news," he said, smiling in that confident salesman way he'd perfected over the years. Grandma looked up immediately, her eyes lighting with curiosity. "What kind of news?" she asked. My mother leaned forward, her smile already prepared. "We're taking the family to Europe," she said. For a moment, the words seemed to float in the air above the table, as if no one quite believed them yet. Then Grandma's hand flew gently to her chest. "Europe?" she whispered. Dad nodded, clearly enjoying the moment. 18 days. France, Italy, Switzerland, Germany. We've been planning it for months. Grandma's eyes filled with tears so quickly it startled me. "Oh my goodness," she breathed. I never thought I'd see those places." She looked like someone who had just been handed a dream she'd quietly buried years ago. Growing up, travel had always been something other families did. My grandmother worked nights, saved money, raised my mom alone after my grandfather's health started failing. Vacations were rare. Luxuries were even rarer. My mother reached across the table and gently squeezed Grandma's hand. "That's exactly why we want you there," she said sweetly. "You deserve this. You've taken care of everyone else your whole life." It sounded perfect. Anyone listening would have thought they were witnessing a beautiful family moment. But something inside me tightened. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the training from my job. As a physical therapist, I'm used to noticing things people try to hide: tiny shifts in posture, tension in muscles, the way someone's expression changes for just half a second before they correct it. When my mother smiled, her lips curved perfectly, but her eyes stayed flat. My father continued enthusiastically. "We leave December 2nd. Flights are already being arranged." Grandma laughed softly, almost shyly. "I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Mom replied. "Just pack." Dinner continued with the usual things: wine refills, small talk, discussions about which cities we'd visit first. Grandma asked innocent questions about museums and train rides. She talked about the Eiffel Tower like it was a childhood dream she'd finally get to touch. But on the walk to the parking lot afterward, the illusion cracked for the first time. Grandma and I lagged behind while my parents walked ahead. The October air was cool, and the streetlights made the pavement glow softly. Grandma was still talking excitedly about art museums when I heard my mother's voice up ahead. Low, urgent. "She'll cover her share, right?" Mom whispered. Dad's voice answered quietly. "She has savings. We can't afford 4 people otherwise," my mother said. My stomach dropped. Grandma didn't hear it. She was still describing how she wanted to try French pastries in Paris. I forced a smile and nodded along, but something inside me had already started asking questions. 2 weeks later, I went to Grandma's house for our usual Thursday dinner. It was a small routine we'd kept for years. She cooked something simple. We watched Jeopardy afterward, and I helped her clean the kitchen. That night, when I walked in, I found her sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by papers. "Maggie, "Look at this," she said excitedly. She slid a thick folder toward me. Inside were printed photos of European landmarks, the Eiffel Tower, the Colosseum, snow-covered mountains in Switzerland. She'd highlighted walking tours in yellow marker and written little notes beside them. "I've been researching," she said proudly. "I want to make sure I don't miss anything important." The excitement in her voice made my chest ache. "Grandma," I asked carefully, "did Mom mention anything about the cost?" Her face brightened even more. "Oh yes," she said. "She called yesterday. The trip will be about $15,000 per person. I told her I'd pay my part. $15,000. For someone living on Social Security and a modest pension, that was a huge amount. Almost a year of careful budgeting. Are you sure you want to spend that much?" I asked gently. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Honey, I'm 71, she said. "What else am I saving for? When will I ever get another chance to see Paris?" I couldn't argue with that, but the uneasy feeling stayed. The next week, I stopped by her house unexpectedly after work. The front door was unlocked, like always, and I found her sitting at the kitchen table again. This time, she was filling out a wire transfer form. The number written in the amount box made my breath catch. 30,000, I said before I could stop myself. Grandma looked up, surprised. "Oh, Maggie," she said lightly. "Yes." Natalie explained, "There are additional costs. Travel insurance, upgraded hotels, special dinners. I don't want to be a burden." Burden. That word hurt more than the number. My grandmother had spent her entire life making sure no one else felt like a burden. She worked double shifts when my grandfather got sick. She paid for my mom's college tuition. She watched me after school when my parents were busy building their careers. Now she was worried about inconveniencing them. "Grandma," I said slowly, "that's double what Mom mentioned before." She nodded, signing the form with careful handwriting. "I know," she said, "but your mother has worked so hard planning this trip. If spending a little more makes it easier for everyone, it's worth it." I watched her slide the form aside. The subject line written on it read, "Europe family trip, my share." That night I texted my mother, "Why is Grandma paying $30,000? Her reply came hours later. She insisted, "Don't make her feel bad about it." The message sat on my phone screen longer than it should have. A few days later, during Thanksgiving week, I returned to Grandma's house to help prepare dinner. She was humming quietly while writing something at the table. Another check. "Just $8,000, she said casually when she noticed me looking. "8,000? I repeated. She smiled apologetically. "Natalie said there might be last-minute travel expenses," she explained. "I don't want them covering anything for me." She slid the check into an envelope addressed to my mother. I glanced at the memo line. Travel expenses. 30,000. 8,000 more. $38,000 total. More than half of everything she had saved. Grandma didn't notice the way my expression changed. She was too busy imagining herself standing under the Eiffel Tower, tasting pastries in a cafe, sending postcards from Switzerland. That night, after dinner, she showed me the suitcase she'd already packed. She'd folded everything carefully, comfortable shoes, a small notebook for travel memories, even a phrase book she bought so she could practice French. "I learned how to say thank you," she told me proudly. "Merci," I smiled. But as I drove home that night, something about the entire situation refused to settle in my mind. The numbers didn't make sense. The way my parents had rushed the payments didn't make sense, and the quiet conversation I overheard outside the restaurant kept echoing in my head. We can't afford 4 people. At the time, I didn't realize that the real problem wasn't the cost of a vacation. The real problem was the debt my parents were drowning in, and the plan they were quietly building one email at a time to use my grandmother's money, and eventually her house, to save themselves. I wish I could say I went looking for the truth on purpose, that I had some heroic instinct, some plan to uncover what my parents were doing, but the truth is much less dramatic. The moment that changed everything happened by accident, one quiet afternoon, one open laptop, one subject line that shouldn't have been there. It was the day after Thanksgiving. My parents' house was unusually quiet. My mom had gone out shopping, probably chasing one of those limited holiday sales she loved so much. My dad was playing golf with a client. The house felt almost peaceful without them, the kind of stillness you notice only after constant noise disappears. I had stopped by to help clean up after the holiday dinner. Plates were stacked beside the sink, the smell of roasted turkey still hanging faintly in the kitchen. I remembered a recipe I wanted to print for Grandma, something simple she'd asked me about for Christmas cookies. My mom's laptop was sitting open on the kitchen counter, email already running on the screen. I wasn't snooping, at least, not at first. I moved the mouse to wake the screen fully, expecting to open a new browser tab and print the recipe. But then my eyes landed on a subject line that froze my hand halfway through the motion. Mom's situation. Final plan. The email was dated October 15th. Something about those words felt wrong immediately. Mom's situation. It sounded clinical, detached. Not how you talk about your own mother. I told myself to ignore it, close the laptop, print the recipe, go home. But curiosity and something darker, something protective, kept me staring at that subject line. Before I could talk myself out of it, I clicked. The first email was from my mother to my father. Victor, I've made the appointments. Sunrise Senior Living has availability in January. The deposit is $5,000, but it's worth it. The place looks legitimate enough that she won't resist. For a second, I didn't understand what I was reading. The words were clear, but my brain rejected their meaning. Then I kept reading. Once we're in Europe, we'll tell her the nursing home is already arranged. She'll sign the house papers when we get back. She won't have a choice. My stomach dropped so fast it felt like the floor tilted under my feet. She won't have a choice. My grandmother, who still baked cookies for neighbors, who still watered the plants my grandfather planted 30 years ago, was being discussed like a problem to manage, like an obstacle. My hands started shaking as I scrolled down. There were more emails. Not emotional ones. Not conflicted ones. Organized ones. Cold. Methodical. One email listed 3 facilities they'd toured. Sunrise Senior Living, Brookdale Nursing Home, Hilltop Care Facility. Next to each name were appointment dates, notes, impressions. My parents had been shopping for where to put her, like people compare hotels before a vacation. Another email had numbers. The estimated value of my grandmother's house, $520,000. Remaining mortgage, $135,000. Equity, $385,000. I stared at the screen as the pieces slowly clicked together. This wasn't about helping Grandma. This wasn't about safety or concern. This was about money. Then I opened another email thread and saw the real reason. My mother's failed business venture, something called Vitality Greens LLC. I remembered when she started it 2 years earlier, talking about organic supplements and wellness products like she was launching the next big thing. She'd poured everything into it, insisting it would make the family rich. Apparently it hadn't. The email laid out the situation in brutal detail. Debt, $182,000. Creditors threatening legal action. Final deadline, January 15th. And then a line that made my chest tighten. We can't tell Margaret. She'll try to stop us. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter so hard my knuckles went white. My parents weren't just planning a trip. They were planning a transaction. They were going to take Grandma to Europe, let her think it was a dream, then come back and tell her she had to move into a nursing home. Once she was disoriented, pressured, scared, they'd make her sign the paperwork transferring the house. They weren't just taking the $38,000 she'd already given them. They wanted everything. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind replayed every happy thing Grandma had said in the past few weeks, her excitement, her research folder, the way she practiced saying bonjour in the mirror. And all that time, my parents had been planning to trap her. My phone felt heavy in my pocket. Then instinct took over. Document everything. I pulled it out and started taking screenshots, email after email, appointment confirmations, financial breakdowns, calendar entries. My phone camera made that tiny clicking sound over and over again in the quiet kitchen. Each click felt like collecting evidence at a crime scene. I scrolled further down. There was an email from my father. Natalie, are you sure about this? It feels wrong. For a second, a small piece of hope flickered inside me. Maybe he had a conscience. Maybe this was my mother's idea, and he would stop it. Then I read her reply. We're out of options. This is survival. She's too old to live alone anyway. At least she'll get a trip out of it. The casual cruelty of that sentence made something inside me go cold. She'll get a trip out of it. Like that made everything acceptable. Like stealing someone's home could be balanced by a vacation. I heard the garage door open. My heart jumped into my throat. I closed the email window instantly and set the laptop exactly how it had been. Same angle, same position on the counter. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to breathe slowly. Then I forwarded every screenshot to my personal email. Finally, I deleted the sent message from my mother's account. By the time the front door opened and my mom walked in with shopping bags, I was standing at the counter holding a printed recipe like nothing had happened. Thanks for letting me use your computer, Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She smiled casually, setting her bags down. Of course, honey. She had no idea that in the last 10 minutes, everything had changed. That night, I lay awake in bed, replaying what I'd seen. I kept hoping there was some explanation I'd missed, some misunderstanding. But the numbers were clear. My grandmother had already paid $38,000. My parents owed $182,000. And the solution they'd chosen was to steal the only security she had left. The next morning, I drove to Grandma's house like nothing was wrong. She greeted me with flour on her hands and a huge smile. Maggie, I found the cutest walking tour in Rome, she said, waving a printed page. They go through all the old neighborhoods. I sat at the kitchen table, watching her excitement, and something inside me twisted painfully. She trusted them completely. She trusted them so much that when she wired $30,000, she'd written in the memo line, my share. Not loan, not partial payment. Her share. Because she believed she was part of the family adventure. I almost told her right then. The words sat on my tongue, burning. But if I told her without proof, without a plan, my parents could twist it. They could claim I misunderstood. They could say I was being dramatic or jealous. And Grandma, she loved them. She would want to believe them. So instead, I swallowed the truth and smiled. You're going to have an amazing trip, I said softly. For the next 2 weeks, I played along. I watched my parents talk about luggage and hotels like nothing was wrong. I listened to Grandma practice French phrases in her living room mirror. I nodded when my mom mentioned final travel expenses. But every night, I studied those emails again. Every detail, every date. The nursing home deposit, the January move-in, the debt deadline, and the line that kept echoing in my head like a warning bell. She won't have a choice. By the time December 2nd arrived, I knew exactly what my parents were planning to do. They thought the airport would be the start of their perfect escape. They thought they could leave my grandmother behind with nothing but embarrassment and silence. What they didn't realize was that I had already seen the entire plan. And once you know the truth behind someone's smile, it becomes very hard to pretend you didn't. When we left the airport that morning, my grandmother didn't cry. That was the first thing I noticed. Anyone who had watched what happened might have expected tears, anger, something loud enough to match the humiliation she'd just been through. But Grandma Ellie was quiet, in a way that felt heavier than any breakdown. She sat in the passenger seat of my car, holding her passport in both hands like it was something fragile. The same passport she had been so proud to show me when it arrived in the mail. The same passport she had checked 3 times that morning to make sure it was in her purse. The drive back from Denver International took about 45 minutes, but it felt longer. Traffic moved steadily, sunlight beginning to spill across the highway, the kind of ordinary morning that didn't care about the small disasters happening inside people's lives. Grandma stared out the window almost the entire time. I kept glancing at her, wondering if she was going to say something, ask questions, demand answers, but she didn't. When we finally turned onto her street, the familiar neighborhood looked exactly the same as it always had. The Morrisons' house next door with the same white fence. The maple tree in the front yard my grandfather planted decades ago. Everything looked normal, which somehow made the betrayal feel even stranger. We parked in the driveway. Grandma opened the car door slowly and stepped out like someone learning to walk again. She didn't speak until we were inside the house. Once the front door closed behind us, she placed her suitcase by the wall and sat down on the living room couch. That couch had been there since I was a kid. It was the same place she used to rock me to sleep during thunderstorms, the same place we'd sit together watching Jeopardy every Wednesday night. She looked at me, her eyes tired but steady. "Show me," she said. I sat down beside her and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking slightly as I opened the folder where I'd saved the screenshots. For 2 weeks, those images had lived in my pocket, like a secret weight. Now they were about to break her heart. "I'm going to show you everything," I told her gently. "The emails, the appointments, the money, all of it." She nodded once. I started with the first email, the one about Sunrise Senior Living. Grandma read silently, leaning forward slightly, her glasses sliding down the bridge of her nose. I watched her face carefully as she moved through the messages. First came confusion, then disbelief, then something harder. When she reached the line, "She won't have a choice," her fingers trembled just slightly, but she didn't cry. She finished reading every screenshot before saying a single word. The room stayed quiet, except for the faint ticking of the clock above the fireplace. Finally, she placed my phone down on the coffee table. "How long have you known?" she asked. 2 weeks, I admitted. "Why didn't you tell me before?" The question cut deeper than anything my parents had done. "I needed proof," I said softly. "If I told you without evidence, they could have convinced you I misunderstood. I didn't want you doubting yourself." Grandma nodded slowly. She picked the phone up again and scrolled back to one of the emails. Her finger paused on the line where my parents discussed her house value like it was an asset waiting to be claimed. "I worked 43 years, she said quietly. "Night shifts, holidays. I missed birthdays, Maggie. I missed Christmas mornings sometimes, all so your mother could have a better life." Her voice didn't break. That almost made it worse. "And this is what she thinks I am now," she continued. "A problem to be managed." I reached for her hand. "You're not a problem. You're the strongest person I know." Grandma took a long breath and sat up straighter. "Let's check my bank accounts." We moved to the kitchen table with my laptop. Grandma brought out a folder where she kept her financial paperwork, everything organized the way only a lifelong nurse could manage. Within minutes, we found the transfers. November 1st, $30,000 wire transfer to Natalie Cleveland. November 21st, $8,000 cashier's check cleared. Total, Trent of Wit, 0. Grandma stared at the screen. "That's more than half my savings," she said. "Your grandfather worked overtime for years to build that account." I didn't say anything. I didn't have the words. After a moment, Grandma leaned back in her chair. "Call that nursing home." I blinked. "What?" "The one in the email. Sunrise Senior Living." Her voice had changed, cooler, more deliberate. "Call them and pretend you're Natalie. Grandma, I need to know how far they've already gone." So I did what she asked. I put the phone on speaker and dialed the number listed in the email. After 2 rings, a cheerful voice answered. "Sunrise Senior Living. How may I assist you today?" My heart was pounding, but I tried to sound confident. "Hi, this is Natalie Cleveland," I said. "I'm calling about a reservation for my mother, Eleanor Brennan." There was a pause while the receptionist typed. "Oh yes, Mrs. Cleveland," she said brightly. "I see the reservation here. January move-in date. Semi-private room, level 2 care. Your deposit of $5,000 has already been processed." My stomach twisted. "Thank you," I said quickly before hanging up. The silence afterward felt heavy. Grandma had heard everything. "They already paid the deposit," she said slowly. "Yes." "With my money," I nodded. Grandma stood up and walked to the kitchen window. Outside, the small backyard garden she'd tended for decades was still covered with fallen autumn leaves. The bird feeder my grandfather built hung from a tree branch. She watched the yard for a long moment. Then she turned back to me. "Margaret," she said calmly, "I need the name of a good lawyer." The next morning, I started making calls. Eventually, I found an elder law attorney named Sarah Cunningham through a legal referral service. She agreed to meet us that same afternoon. Sarah's office was smaller than I expected. Neat, organized, shelves filled with legal books and family photos. She looked to be in her mid-40s with streaks of gray in her hair and glasses perched on the edge of her nose. We told her everything. I showed her the screenshots. Grandma handed over the bank statements. Sarah read through the documents carefully without interrupting. When she finished, she leaned back in her chair and folded her hands. "Mrs. Brennan," she said, "this is a very serious situation. What your daughter and son-in-law did qualifies as financial exploitation of an at-risk adult." Grandma didn't flinch. "Can we stop them?" "Yes," Sarah replied. "First, we document everything. Every email, every financial transfer. Then we file a report with Adult Protective Services. After that, we send them a formal letter demanding restitution." "And if they refuse?" I asked. Sarah's expression hardened slightly. "Then we take legal action." Grandma was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she asked something none of us expected. "How quickly can someone sell a house?" Sarah blinked in surprise. "Your house?" she asked. Grandma nodded. "If I decided to sell it, how fast could it happen?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "With the right buyer," she said. "A few weeks." Grandma turned to me. "Do you remember the Morrisons next door?" she asked. Of course I did. They'd lived beside Grandma for 15 years. Their son Jake had asked last year if she'd ever consider selling the house so his family could move back to Colorado. Grandma had said no at the time. Now she looked at me with quiet determination. "I think it's time to call them." And in that moment, sitting in that small lawyer's office, I realized something important. My parents believed they had already won. They thought the trip to Europe would buy them time. They thought Grandma would stay quiet, confused, embarrassed. They thought they would come home and simply continue the plan. What they didn't understand was that my grandmother wasn't weak. She had spent 43 years surviving hospital chaos, raising a daughter, burying a husband, and building a life from careful choices. And now, for the first time since that morning at the airport, I saw the same strength in her eyes again. My parents had 3 weeks in Europe thinking they were celebrating their victory. What they didn't realize was that those same 3 weeks were about to become the biggest mistake of their lives. The strange thing about revenge, at least the kind that doesn't involve shouting or violence, is that it often happens quietly. There are no dramatic explosions, no cinematic confrontations, just decisions, signatures, phone calls, and the slow realization that someone's carefully built plan has already collapsed. After our meeting with Sarah Cunningham, everything moved faster than I expected. Grandma didn't waste time. That same afternoon, sitting at her kitchen table with the late winter sun spilling through the window, she asked me to call the Morrisons next door. They had lived beside her for more than 15 years. They were the kind of neighbors who brought cookies at Christmas, shoveled her driveway during snowstorms, and always waved from across the lawn. Last year, their son Jake had mentioned that if Grandma ever decided to sell the house, he would love to buy it and raise his family there. Back then, she laughed it off. Now she picked up the phone herself. "Tom," she said, when he answered, her voice steady, "I think it might be time to talk about that offer." The Morrisons came over the next morning. Tom and Linda arrived first, both looking concerned in the way neighbors do when they know something serious has happened but don't want to pry. A few minutes later, Jake and his wife arrived with their little daughter, a 3-year-old girl who immediately ran toward the backyard bird feeder. The house felt different with them there, not sad, not tense, just full of life again. Grandma explained simply that she needed to sell quickly. She didn't give them the full story. She didn't need to. Tom listened quietly, nodding. "We can offer $515,000, he said finally. Cash. No inspection contingencies. We could close in about 10 days if you're comfortable with that." That price was slightly below market value, but Grandma didn't hesitate. "Done," she said. I watched her sign the listing agreement right there at the kitchen table where she had spent decades making family dinners. Her hand was steady. If she felt grief about leaving the house, she didn't show it. Linda reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Ellie," she said softly, "your home will be loved." Grandma smiled faintly. "I know it will." While my parents were sipping wine somewhere in France, posting photos of Paris cafes and mountain views online. The house they believed would soon belong to them was already moving into someone else's future. The following week moved quickly. Monday morning, Sarah filed the official report with Adult Protective Services. Within 2 hours, we received a call from a caseworker named Daniel Torres. His voice was calm but serious. "Mrs. Brennan," he said, "financial exploitation cases are something we take very seriously. I'll need to meet with you and review the documentation." Tuesday afternoon, he arrived at the house. Daniel was in his early 40s, wearing a dark jacket and carrying a leather folder. He spent almost 2 hours with us at the dining room table, going through every piece of evidence: the emails, the bank transfers, the nursing home reservation, the screenshots I had taken. The more he read, the quieter he became. Finally, he looked up and said something that made me realize how serious this really was. "This is one of the clearest cases I've seen in a long time." Grandma sat very still. "What happens now?" she asked. "I'll contact your daughter and son-in-law when they return," Daniel explained. "But for now, we document everything. You've already done the most important part, keeping records." After he left, Grandma exhaled slowly, like someone who had been holding their breath for weeks. The rest of the week was a blur of packing. 40 years of life doesn't fit easily into boxes. We sorted through photo albums, old Christmas decorations, my grandfather's tools in the garage, the quilt Grandma had stitched by hand years ago, some things she kept, some she donated, some she simply let go of. One evening, we stood together in the doorway of the bedroom where my mother had grown up. "I raised Natalie in this room," Grandma said quietly. "I stayed up all night when she had pneumonia at 7. I taught her to braid her hair right there by the mirror." She paused, her eyes moving slowly across the empty space. "I don't know that person anymore." There was no anger in her voice, just acceptance. December 15th arrived faster than expected. Closing day. The title company office smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink. Grandma sat at the conference table across from Jake Morrison and his wife, while a title agent named Patricia walked us through the paperwork. Page after page of signatures. Finally, Patricia slid the settlement statement toward Grandma. "After paying off the remaining mortgage and closing costs," she said, "your net proceeds will be approximately $357,000. Grandma read the number, nodded once, and signed the final page. Just like that, the house my parents thought they would inherit, thought they would force her to surrender, was gone. Jake shook her hand. "My kids are going to grow up here," he said warmly. "We'll take good care of it." "I know you will," Grandma replied. But the house sale was only the first move. That same afternoon, Grandma sat down with Sarah again and made 3 decisions that changed everything. First, she purchased a 1-bedroom condo in a quiet, gated community about 15 minutes from my apartment. It was smaller than her house, but bright and comfortable, with a balcony overlooking a park. The community had a book club, exercise classes, and neighbors who looked out for one another. The purchase price was $185,000, paid in full, no mortgage. Second, Grandma placed $38,000 into a separate account. "That's for when they come back," she said calmly. I knew exactly what she meant. She was getting her money back, one way or another. Third, and perhaps most importantly, she worked with Sarah to establish an irrevocable trust with the remaining money, about $134,000. The trust named me as beneficiary and was structured so that Grandma could access only the interest, not the principal. Even if someone tried to pressure her again in the future, the money would be legally untouchable. "Think of it like a vault," Sarah explained. "Even if someone convinces you to hand over the key, the vault itself won't open." Grandma liked that idea. When she signed the trust documents on December 18th, she looked more peaceful than I had seen her since the airport. Meanwhile, my parents continued posting photos online. Paris, Switzerland. Luxury dinners. Snow-covered mountains. Every image looked like a celebration. They had no idea that back home, the house they planned to take no longer existed in their future. The final step of the plan happened on December 23rd, 3 weeks after the airport. I was at Grandma's new condo helping unpack kitchen boxes when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice on the other end was not. "Margaret." My father sounded furious. "Where is your grandmother?" I glanced across the room at Grandma, who was arranging books on a shelf. I put the phone on speaker. "She's safe," I said calmly. "We just went to her house," Victor snapped. "There are strangers living there." A man answered the door with a kid. "What the hell did you do?" I felt something cold and satisfying settle in my chest. "I didn't do anything," I said. "Grandma sold the house." There was silence on the line. Then my mother's voice, sharp with disbelief. "She can't sell it. That's family property." I almost laughed. "No," I replied quietly. "It was her property." Grandma looked up at me from across the room, and for the first time in weeks, she smiled. Not a happy smile. A strong one. The kind that comes when someone finally understands they still control their own life. My father's voice came back, shaking now. "Where is she?" "Why?" I asked. "So you can put her in Sunrise Senior Living like you planned?" Another silence. A long one. Because in that moment, they realized something they never expected. Their entire plan had already collapsed, while they were busy celebrating in Europe. My grandmother had taken her power back. When my parents finally understood that the house was gone, the silence on the phone felt heavier than any argument could have been. For years, they had believed they were the ones in control, planning, calculating, deciding how other people's lives would unfold. But in that moment, standing in a quiet condo living room beside my grandmother, I realized something had shifted. The power they thought they had quietly slipped away while they were busy enjoying Europe. My father spoke first, his voice no longer confident, just strained. "You had no right," he said. "You turned her against us." I looked across the room at Grandma. She was standing near the window, sunlight falling across the new furniture we had just finished unpacking. The condo was smaller than her old house, but it felt lighter somehow, like a place that belonged to her rather than a place someone might try to take. "I didn't turn her against you," I replied calmly. "I showed her the truth." My mother's voice suddenly cut through the call, sharp and defensive. "You poisoned her mind, Margaret. You've always been dramatic. Mom knows we'd never hurt her." Grandma stepped closer and placed her hand gently on my arm, asking silently for the phone. I handed it to her. "Hello, Natalie," she said quietly. For a moment, there was only breathing on the other end. "Mom," my mother said finally, her voice trembling in a way I had never heard before. "What is going on? Why would you sell the house without telling us?" Grandma's answer was calm, almost gentle. "Because it was my house." Silence again. "I trusted you," Grandma continued, "and you used that trust to take money from me. You made plans for my life without my permission. You decided where I would live like I wasn't even part of the conversation." My father tried to interrupt. "Eleanor, we were just trying to help." "No," she said firmly. "You were trying to solve your problems with my life." Her voice never rose, but the strength in it filled the room. "I know about the nursing home deposit," she added. "I know about the emails. I know about the debt. I know everything." There was no argument after that. Eventually, my father muttered something about talking later, and the call ended. For the first time since the airport, the situation felt real. They had lost the house they thought would save them. They had lost the ability to control the narrative. But the story wasn't finished yet. That same evening, 2 certified letters arrived at my parents' house. Sarah Cunningham had prepared them carefully. One was addressed to Victor Cleveland, the other to Natalie Cleveland. Inside were several pages outlining every piece of evidence we had gathered. The emails, the financial transfers, the nursing home reservation, and the abandonment at the airport. The letters demanded restitution of the $38,000 Grandma had given them, along with additional damages for emotional distress. If they refused, Sarah would file a civil lawsuit and forward the case to the district attorney for potential criminal charges related to financial exploitation of an elderly adult. The letters also made something else clear. From that point forward, my parents were not to contact Grandma directly. Any communication had to go through Sarah's office. My father tried to call the lawyer that night. He left a voicemail saying there had been a misunderstanding and that everything could be resolved privately. But the truth had already been documented. A few days later, Adult Protective Services followed up. Daniel Torres interviewed both of my parents when they returned to Colorado. According to the report Sarah later shared with us, they tried to explain the situation as a family disagreement. They claimed Grandma had willingly given them the money. Then Daniel showed them the emails. After that, the report simply said, both parties declined further comment. They understood what those emails meant. Soon after, my parents hired a lawyer of their own. A week later, he contacted Sarah to discuss a settlement. My parents agreed to repay the full amount plus additional compensation, totaling $43,000 through monthly payments over the course of a year. It wasn't just about the money. The agreement required something else: a written apology acknowledging what they had done and accepting responsibility for it. When the letter arrived, Grandma read it slowly. My mother admitted she had taken the money under false pretenses. She acknowledged that the Europe trip had been used as a way to gain Grandma's trust while planning to force her into a living situation she hadn't chosen. She wrote that fear and debt had pushed her into decisions she now deeply regretted. My father's portion was shorter, but the meaning was clear. He admitted he had participated in the plan and failed to stop it. Grandma folded the pages carefully and placed them in a drawer. "It's a start," she said quietly. "But trust doesn't come back that easily." Over the following months, life slowly settled into a new rhythm. Grandma adjusted surprisingly well to the condo. She joined the building's book club and made friends with a group of women who met every Tuesday evening to discuss novels and drink cheap wine. She started taking water aerobics classes at the community pool. Sometimes when I visited, I found her laughing with neighbors, like she had known them for years. The heaviness she carried after the airport slowly faded. For me, things were more complicated. They were still my parents, after all. I couldn't erase my childhood memories, but I couldn't ignore what they had done either. Therapy helped me understand something important. Loving someone doesn't mean accepting everything they do. Months passed. The payments arrived every month exactly as the settlement required. Gradually, my parents began trying to rebuild some form of relationship. At first, the attempts were small birthday cards, brief messages through Sarah's office, asking if Grandma would be willing to talk. For a long time, she refused. Then one day, after nearly 6 months, Grandma surprised me. "I think I'm ready to see Natalie," she said quietly. The meeting happened in a public room at the condo building with me and Sarah present. My mother looked older somehow, thinner, like the year had worn her down. She didn't make excuses this time. "I was scared," she admitted, her voice shaking. "I thought if we lost everything, I'd lose you too. But what I did was worse than losing money. I nearly lost my family." Grandma listened quietly. "I can't pretend nothing happened," she said finally, "and I can't promise things will ever be the same. But if you truly want to change, we can try to build something new." That moment didn't magically fix everything, but it was a beginning. By the time the final payment arrived nearly a year later, Grandma's life looked completely different from the one my parents had planned for her. Her condo was filled with plants and sunlight. She had new friends. She even took a small cruise with the book club group, a trip she planned and paid for herself. One evening, as we sat together watching Jeopardy, the same way we had for nearly 3 decades, she said something that stayed with me. "You know, Maggie, people think kindness means letting others walk all over you. But kindness without boundaries isn't kindness. It's surrender." I nodded, thinking about everything that had happened. My parents still visit occasionally now. The relationship is cautious, built on honesty instead of assumptions. They're still paying off their own debts and still attending therapy. Are we completely healed as a family? No. But we are honest in a way we never were before. Grandma turned 72 recently. She's healthier than she's been in years, surrounded by friends who see her for who she is instead of what she has. And sometimes when she visits the old neighborhood, she stops by the house she once lived in. The Morrison family's children play in the yard where my grandfather planted that maple tree decades ago. She watches them for a moment, smiling softly. Then she turns and walks back to the car. Because the most important thing she learned from all of this, the thing she reminds me of every time we talk about it, is simple. You can love people and still protect yourself from them. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is take your life back. Sometimes the most painful betrayals don't come from strangers, they come from the people we trusted the most. This story was never just about $38,000, a trip to Europe, or even a house. It was about something deeper: trust, dignity, and the quiet strength it takes to reclaim your life when someone tries to take it away from you. My grandmother could have stayed silent, embarrassed, and allowed the plan to unfold exactly as my parents expected. But instead, she chose courage. She chose to stand up for herself, not with anger, but with clarity and strength. And in doing so, she reminded me that kindness should never mean surrendering your voice or your future. Stories like this happen more often than we realize. Families are complicated, love can be messy, and sometimes the people closest to us lose their way. But the lesson here is simple. It is never too late to protect what matters and take your life back. If this story moved you, or if it reminded you of someone who deserves to be protected and respected, I hope you'll stay with us for more stories like this. Please consider subscribing to the channel Revenge Tale Society. Here, we share real, emotional stories about family, resilience, and the quiet strength people discover when life pushes them to their limits. Your support helps these stories reach more hearts.